All righty then. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to our VC and investor education programs. My name overview. My name is Patrick Driscoll. I am your happy moderator here. I'm thrilled to say that we had well over 250 registrations for this event. So I think that props off to our amazing panelists. We did a lot of work in order to get this up and running for you to really provide the best content and overview of what programs really exist out there for folks looking to break into VC, start their own funds, or potentially join an existing fund as an analyst, associate, etc. So I truly see the future of VC in this attendee list, and I'm super stoked and happy to provide insight with the panel and advice to all of you throughout this panel. So let's go ahead. Before we do get started, however, I wanted to do a brief overview of StartOut. So our mission, why we exist. So we're a US-based nonprofit organization founded in 2009, and we really focus on supporting LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs and startup founders and investors. Our mission is to increase the number, diversity, and impact of LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs, and also to really amplify their stories, make sure they get out there. And this is all to ultimately drive the economic empowerment of the queer community. So over the past 10 years, we've built a pretty robust community of 18,000 members, and we support well over 300 entrepreneurs every single year. So in essence, we're all about networking, entrepreneurship, and community. And if you're a founder or an investor, or if you're a founder specifically, we provide direct individual support through community events, one-on-one mentorship, one-on-one office hours with some of our experts, a 6-month accelerator program, and investor connections. If you're an investor, we also have our investor portal where you have access to deal flow and can get intros to some of our top founders spinning out of the StartOut ecosystem. So our reach is quite large. I won't get into all of these statistics, but I'll quickly mention our Growth Lab, which is the only LGBTQ plus focus accelerator. Our companies have raised over $500 million, which is amazing for us and a great indicator of success. We have a ton of mentors. If you're interested in mentoring, specifically as an investor, we welcome mentors left and right. I myself am a mentor and working closely with some fantastic companies. We have a network of 300 plus investors, which is really good for deal flow and sharing. And then we have events. So check out StartOut's in-person and virtual events across the United States. A quick shout out to our sponsors. So thank you to all of our amazing sponsors that make the StartOut world possible. And now let's get to the reason why we're all here. Our panel. So a quick introduction for myself. My name is Patrick Driscoll. I'm a general partner at Chasing Rainbows and a VC product lead at Carta. So I actually ran 500 Global's venture capital unlocked programs for quite some time when I started in the venture ecosystem. So I'm familiar at running VC education programs, and I'm actually currently enrolled in VC University at Berkeley. So I, as a participant, will be able to share those experiences, and as a former operator of programs, can talk about that. And with that, we have our glorious panel, Monique Woodard, Stephen Russi, and Claude Dorsenville. And I'll let each of them introduce themselves, and I'll hand it off to Monique to start.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monique Woodard. I'm the founding partner and managing director of Cake Ventures, an early stage firm focused on areas of demographic change that are changing technology, like aging and longevity, or the increased spending power of women, or the rise of a new majority. I started my career in venture at 500 startups, now called 500 Global. And so have, as part of that, I also did Venture Unlocked, VC Unlocked. I am now a Kauffman Fellow, and I've spoken at Material Change, which is a venture capital education program, as well as Black Venture Institute, sponsored by Black VC, which is also another program. So have experience from both, being a part of, a VC education and networking communities, as well as speaking and being involved. So excited to share whatever I can with you all today. Thanks for having me.
Next up, Stephen.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Stephen Russi. I'm a managing partner at Embark Capital, and we invest in other VC firms, emerging managers firms, as well as do the pro rata for the companies that come out of those. My experience here comes from a couple different areas. One of them is by doing angel investing over the last decade. Starting when I first moved to San Francisco, I was working at a company called Weebly, and on the side, I was building out an e-commerce and platform system for it. On the side, I was angel investing. So I've been doing that for about a decade, and then right now it's my first fund, and I went through a program called VC Lab, which is a free program. And hopefully we'll get a chance for me to talk about it a little bit later. Thank you.
And finally, Jean-Claude.
Hey everyone, my name is Jean-Claude Dorsenville. I'm an investor on the team over at XYZ Venture Capital. We're an early stage fintech and enterprise focused fund. We like to back people as soon as we can. So we call it formation through Series A. I've had the pleasure and great privilege of working with a number of organizations. I got my start in venture through, a student venture organization, actually, when I was at UC Berkeley, called the Dorm Room Fund. And there I had the opportunity to really kickstart, a program that has now sort of gone through 4 or 5 cycles called the Blueprint Investor Track. And that was a program dedicated towards increasing the representation of, diverse investors sort of at the student level. And then when I graduated, had the opportunity to join the leadership team over at Black VC and help spin up a program that does the same for early career professionals called Breaking into Venture. I'm so happy and excited to talk about those programs as well as my own experience. I shared with the team before, but I've sort of used both of those programs, creating them as my own sort of inroads into venture as well. So happy to share more and excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop share so we can get a good look at everyone. And let's get this panel started. So I'd love to open up the first question just to everyone. So basically, what are all of your thoughts on VC education programs? We have attendees and also those that have actually run programs before. So just to get the ball rolling, I'd love your general overview of VC education before we get into the nitty-gritty. So maybe Jean-Claude, if you'd like to begin as someone who's running a program, or even in any experience that you have as well attending.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, to date, I've helped build a couple programs so far. And really, it's just because I believe that, so much of our success in venture, particularly as underrepresented groups, underestimated groups, representation and education tend to be some of the biggest barriers. So I spent my time with, a ton of, particularly in my experience, being introduced to venture when I was in school, you saw a clear distinction between the kids who were bright, and then you had the kids who were bright and knew about venture, and sort of the acceleration into venture, as you can imagine, happened at a much higher velocity for folks who actually knew about venture. And the folks who didn't, are sort of sitting at a standstill because they're trying to get past, one of the biggest barriers, which is jargon and just understanding of the mechanisms. And so, I was in a position where I, was dedicated to learn about venture. I wanted to find my way into an investor seat. And so, I figured, hey, if I'm going to be going through this process and learning, I'm already compiling documents and resources and reaching out to folks to chat with as many people as I can, because I figured as much as I can learn, to get me one step closer to, being in that investor seat. And then, I've sort of used the programs that I've spun up to date as launch pads to actually, help others, but also help myself. Most of these programs were experiments that I was running on my own. The Breaking into Venture program was an experiment that I was running post-graduation. The Blueprint Investor Track was an experiment that I was running while I was in school. And those are really just ways to say, hey, if I can teach myself venture, will somebody give me a job in the industry? You know, and I'd spent time doing more traditional financial services, investment banking. And so I figured I knew some of the lingo, but not enough. And now I'm a huge advocate of just, you know, any and every, you know, venture program that you can get into and that you can get your hands on gets you one step closer to understanding the job. And that gets you one step closer to be able to do the job. And so happy to dig more into the programs as we continue the panel, but I'll stop there for now.
Absolutely. Monique, how about you? Any insight there?
Sure. So when I started in venture, there was really no clear path into venture for someone who was like me, right? And that's even though I had been an entrepreneur twice, I had started a community of founders, and worked really closely with entrepreneurs. You know, I always tell people I was like doing the job of venture before I had a job in venture. But there was really no clear path into venture capital. And so I found myself sort of like knocking on every door and kind of getting roadblocked at every turn. And now I think there are a lot of programs where you know, you can really get educated on venture capital and create a network for yourself and create your own pathway into venture. And that didn't exist before. And so I think these venture capital education programs are really great for that. I was on the phone on Zoom earlier today with someone who went through the material change program, saw me speak at one of their events, and after having been an entrepreneur, didn't have experience in venture. Now she's in her first venture role at a corporate venture capital fund. And so, you know, these programs do work, right? And I think there are a lot of them. So I think sometimes it can be hard to evaluate which program is right for you. But one of the things that I think is incredibly important is the network, and does the program deliver a network of people who are in venture or interested in venture, who can really help accelerate your career path. And I think, you know, for me, I would say Kauffman in particular has done that. You know, there are things that I will ask my fellow fellows, and I will immediately apply that to helping one of my portfolio companies or making introductions or something like that. And I think, you know, the strength of that kind of network is really important. And, you know, it certainly exists in Kauffman and exists in other programs as well. And so I think really coming away from some of these education programs with a better network than you started with is the true path.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Monique and Stephen, anything to add?
Yes, Jean-Claude mentioned something about nomenclature. So, you know, I would suggest a couple of books to get started with. I suggest every founder that I know read Venture Deals by Brad Feld, where it goes through a lot of the terminology that happens in a term sheet, what a term sheet is, etc. And then if you are going into venture and you want to know the mechanics of creating your own fund, Winter Mead has a book called How to Raise a Venture Capital Fund. It's a pretty recent book, which is rare. There hasn't been a lot of books on the subject in probably over a decade. So this one's actually relatively recent. So after you've done those, and assuming you're at the point where you already know how to do due diligence, and you already know how to decide like which companies you're going to invest in and the like, and you're ready to actually get to the point of starting a fund and the mechanics of that, and raising capital from LPs, then that's the point at which VC Lab is a good program for you. It's really not made to teach you like how to determine whether a company is investable, or how to do due diligence or anything like that. It is there to help you get to your first close. And as a program, it does a really great job of that. And the only way to really graduate is to like complete your first close. There is a cohort system for it. So there's I was in cohort 6. They're taking applications for cohort 8, I believe, right now. I'm not part of it, but I'll put a link up towards the end. If I think there's a requirement for knowing someone in the program, you can just use my name, and that should be sufficient. And yeah, it does have this great community. There's 200 people that generally start in each cohort, but it gets whittled down and you get broken into groups and you get to really know those people in that group. And then they also kind of, as you get through the program, then you kind of expand into areas that are like niches, often by geography and things like that. There's Slack rooms for all that. Then those are all for all the cohorts. And so you do get a number of people from which to ask questions and give answers.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for that great kind of step through the door of all these venture education programs. Now, I'd like to maybe focus specifically on impact. So how these programs have really opened up doors for you. And Monique, you mentioned Kauffman, and I'd love to hear specifically about kind of those really well-known programs that have been around for a while, like Kauffman Fellows, or anything else in your experience, and what kind of doors those have opened for you.
Sure. So, by the time I became a Kauffman Fellow, I had been in venture for quite some time. I had a really solid network. I've been in startups most of my adult career. I have no true other skills. And so, really the Kauffman Fellows program is less about education and more about how do you work well with other venture investors, and how do you leverage your network, how do you grow your network, and then how do you leverage it for the success of your portfolio companies or your fund and firm. And I think it's really been able to deliver upon those things. Like I mentioned, often there are things that portfolio companies need, and there's a really active WhatsApp group that I can dip into and say, hey, who can introduce me to debt investors, or who can introduce me to back office providers. And so in that way, it's been incredibly valuable and will have paid for itself time and time over. And I don't think I realized the power of that network until I was actually in it. As a person with a really strong, who came to it with a really strong network, I was kind of like, I already have a network. I kind of already know everyone, right? And then I discovered that it opened up even more. So I really can't say enough about that program in particular, but in figuring out ways to accelerate your network beyond, beyond the growth of your network that you just do on a regular basis.
Yeah, venture education programs are, everyone thinks content and the education piece, but that network component is absolutely paramount. In that same vein, Jean-Claude, what for kind of underrepresented communities, like a lot of the folks that are in this webinar, Black VC brings together a community of folks with similar experiences. Ideally, what kind of network effect have you seen in your experience running that program? In terms of
so Black VC as an organization, was founded, originally because there was, a few investors that got together, right? For folks who have, been on a Black VC webinar or have read the story on the website, right? It was the founders, Fredney and Sid, who got together with, a few of their mentors and who were saying, hey, look, we don't have sort of a mobilizing effort to get, Black venture investors together. How about we start something? To Monique's point, your network is, the cliche, your network is your net worth. In venture, it literally is, right? The right person, they introduce you to the right deal, it returns your fund, everybody wins. And so if you're, when you get into venture, what you see is that so many people have formed their own sort of adult cliques. You know, these are my group of friends. These are the people that I share deals with. These are the people that I go to dinner with. And so if you're sitting here in an underrepresented group and you don't have that network, then you are sitting at a deficit relative to your peer group. And so the origin of Black VC was, hey, let's try to correct that imbalance. And now the community has grown. We've got hundreds, nearing thousands of community members. And, the goal was to 4x the number of venture investors by 2025, I believe. And we're well on that, on track to achieve that, I believe. There's always more work to be done, but, the effort is, hey, let's see if we can multiply the number of Black investors in the ecosystem. And so really part of the shift that happened when I joined Black VC, I really joined in, sort of very opportunistic. I was, speaking on a panel for another organization called HBCU VC, which is another incredible resource for underrepresented folks who have attended an HBCU to get involved in venture and startups. I met, the co-founder of Black VC, Fred, and then we really started brainstorming after that. He was helping me as someone who's on the younger side of the venture spectrum. Typically folks are joining post MBA, post, a few years of operating. And it's only been in the past few years that you've seen this trend of folks joining sort of the venture ecosystem straight out of school or straight out of undergrad. And so we were brainstorming, how can someone in my shoes sort of have the biggest impact in interviews, have the biggest impact on any fund that I might join? And the conclusion that we came to is that, A, we've got to start with, some of the fundamental work, right? Part of the risk that, I believe fund managers are trying to avoid is that, in venture, there's a direct correlation between the number of heads in a fund and everybody's sort of compensation, work, effort. And so you've got to, think very strategically about that. And so, the idea was like, how can we equip people as early and as quickly as possible with the knowledge that they need to just ramp up in any role that they might have the opportunity to sit in. And so, part of what we've done is, we were like, hey, let's start with a curriculum. And then let's really layer on the piece that Monique was talking about, and that I think Stephen mentioned as well, which was this network, right? So we've already built a network. Now let's start on the educational piece. And that was sort of the, the start of our, what we call our products as Black VC, and so we started with the Breaking Into Venture program. Then we started creating other programs. We created the Black Venture Institute, which, Monique has been a speaker on, I believe, a couple times now. And then we launched a Scout program. And so it was all about, how do we operationalize some of the work that I think everyone has done in some capacity on their own, right? I think everyone had some form of spreadsheet and document with all the resources listed. And we're like, can we just package this and give it to people in a way that is, impactful? And part of the, the piece that we were really harping on, that we really, really wanted to make sure we got right was, as we looked around in the ecosystem, we saw other programs, a lot of programs, there's some open source resources. You think Venture Deals has a program that they offer online. It's free, you can join it. There are cohorts, I believe, a number of times per year. It's Venture Deals times Kauffman Fellows. And those are really focused on breadth. For us, we were focused on density. We were saying, hey, can we take cohorts of 10 to 12 people and really just shove them into the ecosystem? Let's pair them with a junior mentor, so that's someone who's on the younger side of venture. Let's pair them with a senior mentor, someone who's a GP or a partner at a fund, and can we get them into a seat? And so far we've had, around a 75% conversion rate of our cohorts into venture roles, which has been incredible, right? This past couple months, we had our first participant who went through our first cohort land. They started out as an associate post-program, and then they recently landed a partner role at an early stage fund. And so just seeing sort of the full spectrum of opportunities, and then also the journey of participants from start to finish, sort of gives you a picture of the impact that these programs can have. But it really starts with getting over the nomenclature that Stephen mentioned, and then really piling on the network, because the cohorts that we create, what we're trying to incentivize and sort of architect is like, hey, these are the people that you can be totally transparent with. If you fail an interview, it's okay. So much of it comes down to fit. Is this a good fit for a fund? Is this a good fit for an opportunity? Let's share notes. And a lot of this is happening organically between folks who are, from the same business school, from the same fraternity, from the same mafia of X, insert Google or PayPal or whatever it may be. Can we architect that in small cohorts, in batches, and help shove people into venture? And so that's sort of how we had thought about forming the program. And to date, we've got, we just finished up our 4th cohort. We've got, a couple dozen folks into venture so far, into investor seats. And so, the goal is to continue to, improve these programs over time and continue to make sure that we're focusing on density and quality of experience, because we've seen managing partners knock on the door of another managing partner and say, hey, this is a candidate that you need to spend time with. And often that's all it takes, right? We wish and we hope that the world becomes more open and a bit more accessible to sort of the cold emails, the cold outreach. But I think at this stage, it's still really focused on networks. And so can we manufacture that at a program level? And that's what we try to do, particularly at Black VC.
Nice. Thank you so much for that, Jean-Claude. And I love the history of Black VC as well. I think the impact is huge. And also 75% is very impressive based on other VC programs that I'm aware of. Stephen, you participated in kind of like a unique model through VC Lab, which is like a multi-week hands-on course where you actually have to raise a portion of the fund, I believe, correct? So there's always this question of, should I gain more experience via investments before I do education, or should I get an education before I can deploy capital as an investor, right? So this is kind of a meshed model of both of those perspectives in a way, or if you can elaborate a little bit more on that model and the pros of it.
I would actually say it's less of an education and more sort of a guided homework system for getting your stuff done in order to actually accomplish your goal. So if your goal is to start talking to attorneys and start forming, then you're ready to talk to VC Lab. By that point, you should probably have already found some other way to educate yourself about what VC is, what the names are. You won't make it through very far if you get accepted at all, if you aren't at that point. But if you do feel like you're at the point where you're ready to have your own firm and you're contemplating, do I just create syndicates or do I want a firm? And you're sort of at that path where you have to decide, then maybe that's a good time. If the path is going towards actually creating a fund. If you're going to create a syndicate, I love syndicates. And I see people syndicate deals and send 5,000 deals to me a year. So I see a lot of them, and I know obviously a lot of people in that space. But if you want to actually create a fund and go on and do this like full time for, this is your career, and you want to have funds that eventually have institutional investors and the like, then VC Lab is a great place to go, before you get to the point of hiring an attorney, because a lot of people, put the cart before the horse and don't really realize why that's the case. And so going through the program will help you figure that out. And it'll help you with your sales pitch, how to do your thesis, how to do your deck, how to practice with people, how to go through the mechanics of doing it. But less so about educating you about what venture is.
Absolutely. No, that's fair. If just a reminder for everyone to provide your questions in the Q&A, and there's a lot of questions coming in specifically around barriers to entry for these programs, specifically as it relates to cost. So a lot of folks from underrepresented backgrounds obviously don't have access to a huge pool of capital. I myself applied to so many venture education programs in order to try to break in, and then would get into them only to be unable to afford, and hopefully there was some sort of scholarship. And I know several programs do offer diversity scholarships or any sort of financial assistance and payment plans. Do any of you have, since this is just coming up left and right in the Q&A, does anyone have any advice on which programs to look to, or if there are any other like sponsorship opportunities or scholarships for folks?
I'll hop in and try to answer that. So I think, these programs exist at a range of of cost, right? Certainly Kauffman is expensive. It's roughly, it's 80K. It's also a 2-year program. The 500 Global Venture Unlocked program is less money. It's also a shorter period of time. There are also lots of free resources that you can unlock online. You know, we talked about, you know, Brad Feld's class in partnership with Kauffman, which I believe is still free. And, you know, I think, and yes, a lot of these education programs also do offer scholarships based on, you know, need or based on other things. And it is, you know, it can be expensive, and you have to figure out what is valuable to you, which program is valuable to you, and which program you feel like you'll get a return on your investment in your own education and network. You know, I saw a comment, you know, mentioning that it's really difficult as an underrepresented person who's raising a Fund 1 and has to pay a GP commit. I am an underrepresented person who raised a Fund 1 and has to pay a GP commit as a solo GP and lives in San Francisco. So I feel you on all of the levels of challenge that, you know, the costs can be. And I think it's just finding the one that is the right fit for you, that maybe has some sort of scholarship involved, and that you can actually derive value from and get some sort of return on your investment, because there is some investment. And I think the biggest investment is your time, you know, aside from the money. And so which ones really deliver?
Anyone else
Yeah.
want to jump in? Yep. John Claude.
Yeah, and I think so. I agree with what Monique was saying, and I tend to tell people pretty bluntly, if you're at, you know, Stephen mentioned the distinction of, you know, where you are on that spectrum of venture knowledge. I think if you are at that point where you're trying to just understand how venture works, I give people the advice of just exhaust all the free resources before you decide to pay for one. I think, you know, the lucky part about where we sit now in the timeline is that everybody and their mom is writing a thread on Twitter about how venture works. Everybody's trying to gain some form of notoriety by sharing how the venture ecosystem works. And so if you're someone looking to break in, I would just say, you know, read as many blogs as you can. Hop on, if you want to pay for anything, pay for a Medium subscription, pay for maybe a Substack subscription to a few writers, but really just try to exhaust all of the free resources, because it doesn't change, like the information doesn't change, you know, in front or behind a paywall, right? What you start to get with the paid programs, I think, is a bit more of the community. But then the last piece, you know, to complement that is also, you know, I've seen people go through paid programs and people go through free programs. And so much of it comes down to how much time and effort you can and choose to dedicate towards teaching yourself. You know, in a lot of the programs that I run, like we have found ourselves hand-holding people and trying to sort of spoon feed content. And at that point, you start to ask yourself, like, what is the point of, you know, participating in this program if it's going to be, you know, if it's going to take an effort for the moderators and the facilitators to get you to do the homework or the assignments or the readings, right? So much of even a venture interview is, you know, I think fund managers trying to determine, like, do you want this? Like, do you want to be in this role? Do you want to be doing this job? Will you make the effort to do this job? And so I say there's a ton of information out there to get you at least from 0 to 1 and maybe 0 to 5 on the venture education piece. And, you know, the Brad Feld program is free. There are threads online. Like, please exhaust all of those before you pay for a program, because it is tough and there's everybody trying to sell you another program. And I saw somebody asked here if there's a program that covers venture and private equity. I know there are a number of programs called Venture University, but there's one Venture University run by a gentleman named Skylar, and I think his program offers venture capital and private equity. That is a paid program, I believe, but I think it's a bit cheaper on the spectrum of venture programs. But please don't pay for things until you've sort of done, you know, the foundational work.
I agree. My experience with VC Lab is free as far as money is concerned, but it's not free as far as your time. I would definitely expect to be spending full time when you're going through VC Lab, because you're going through all the mechanics of starting your own fund, right? So you're going to go through the painful work of deciding your thesis and sending it out to other people and getting feedback, trying to shrink it down into something more manageable in size. The same thing with your deck, going through all the people that you know in your network and figuring out like who are your connectors, who are the investors, how are you going to approach them, and then actually going through and approaching them and pitching them, getting feedback, etc. And this is a full-time job to create a fund, right? And so you need to be prepared to spend that time for doing that. But the program itself is free. And so the first question I asked when I was going through it was like, well, what's the motivation? And one of the things that they do is that they have a fund admin service of their own. And so they're, part of this is also using it as a funnel for their fund admin. So that's, it's an important thing to know. You don't have to use their fund admin at the end. It doesn't matter. And I know lots of people that use plenty of others, and I kind of know who all the fund admins are at this point, along with a lot of the attorneys that do this type of work and fund formation. But definitely, if you're thinking about fund formation, you should go through this program and don't talk to an attorney and waste time and money, because you will likely change how you're doing things, which will, it's like doing construction on a house. Sometimes it's the changes that you make could actually cost more than the construction of the house. So you need to be very careful. So don't spend the money on those sort of things until the very last minute. And this is like some of the things that comes through in this program, but technically the program is free.
Yeah, and just to add, I'll say for programs that I've run before that cost money, oftentimes we saw folks that would raise there would be diversity scholarships, which would either cover full tuition or half tuition. There could be payment plans as well, so consider those. But also folks really like hit their network and ask for, crowdfunding, like, hey, I got into this really competitive program. This is how much tuition is. I'm going to raise on a crowdfunding platform the tuition cost, and then I'll hopefully have this level of impact. And this is specifically true in underrepresented communities, right? So I'm going to bring this back and pay it forward type of mentality. And I used to see folks raise like pretty substantial money to cover their tuition from just their network. Now that's obviously not the case for a lot of folks. Don't come from super wealthy network of people, especially in the underrepresented space, but just something to keep in mind. Now, in that vein, some of these programs are quite competitive, and we have folks who are participants in this from a wide variety of backgrounds. And as the three of you probably know, that VCs come from a wide variety of backgrounds, but how can they really set themselves up for success to get into programs? What type of background do you typically see in order to make sure they get into the most competitive? Is it investment background via angel investments, etc.? So maybe I'll start with Stephen, since you went last.
Sure.
Go first.
Just looking at the other managers in my cohort and this next cohort that's coming through, like you said, the backgrounds are pretty varied. I thought there would be more people with an engineering background like myself. That wasn't necessarily true. There were definitely some. Geographically, the backgrounds are from Singapore to Africa to Europe to the United States. So geography is all over the place. But I'd say that everyone that's in this particular program has some experience or some angle, whether they, they have their own accelerators, or they worked at like venture inside a corporate environment, whether they worked in venture itself, whether they may have been doing investments via syndicates, just to get an idea. I mean, You could join, angel lists and try to join some syndicates. At least you start seeing what some investment memos look like. Now, these are sort of buy-side investment memos. They're not quite the same as investment memos you'd have yourself. But you start to get a feel for things. And then there's just the, people that just go out and what I did, although I was doing some angel investments too, is I just went out and tried to meet as many people as I could with the idea that years later I might be in this industry. So I tried to meet with people that were founders, meet with people that were investors, having nothing to do, I didn't need anything from them. I was just looking towards the future, and it was helpful because it started building out a network that I'm tapping now. Also, you mentioned something about like raising money. Yeah, you're gonna have to get used to asking people for money for probably the rest of your life.
That is the truth. Monique, would you like to go? Any insights on differentiation?
Say that last part again.
Yeah, on how to be the strongest applicant for these VC.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has to figure out what their superpower is. There are certainly, firms and investing careers that have been built around being an engineer, and what that can potentially deliver to a portfolio company or companies. There are certainly people who have had backgrounds in healthcare or policy and been able to build careers in venture around those things. And I think it's really about identifying what is the superpower that you are going to deliver to your portfolio to deliver the best returns to your investors. And then, really leaning into those things as part of your narrative when you go apply for these programs. I also think, to touch on something we talked about earlier, someone asked the question of like, what's more important, to do deals or to go to an education program? And I think they're both wildly important, but I will say like the only thing that speeds up careers in venture is getting the reps in and doing deals. And so even if you're putting like $1,000 to work in a company, the fact that you are able to convince a startup to let you into their round with, a suboptimal check, that proves something, right? And so being able to put money to work, no matter how much it is, really is a way to differentiate yourself, not just for the education programs, but for, a long-term career. And so I would really think about balancing both of these things, balancing both the education piece and the need to just get the reps in. I mean, even when I was, when I had left 500 startups, I was putting my own money into doing deals. I was scouting for Lightspeed. I was working with SoftBank on standing up their Emerge program. Like, I was making sure that I was continuing to get the reps in, because really that's what your career is going to be evaluated on.
1000%. John Claude, anything to add?
Yeah, I guess I want to speak more directly to like an application. If you're submitting an application to a program, I think the biggest thing that I see is just, reading the prompt and then like putting your best foot forward for that application will go a long way. I think, for the programs, that I've been a part of, that I've run, a lot of people get cut, pretty quickly if they, usually there's a description, there's a breakdown of like what the program is, who it's designed for, who it's built, like what it's hoping to teach. And sort of maybe there's an assignment in the application. I know for breaking into venture, we have an assignment in the application. And often people are getting cut simply because it was just like, you just didn't follow the assignment or like read the application closely. So we'll get applicants, our program is designed for folks who are early in their career. And then we'll get applicants who have, 20 years of experience, right? And on the same website as our application, we've got a second program for folks who have 20 years of experience in their career, right? And so you shouldn't waste your time applying to the wrong program, for one. And then B, if you're applying to the program, take the time to actually do the application. And I know it's like, it feels exhausting. I was in that seat as well. It can be exhausting to be applying to programs back to back, but if they ask you to, submit a write-up on like why you think a company is interesting, I would optimize for quality over sort of speed of the application. Like, take a bit of time to understand, like, hey, if you're not quite sure what might make this company interesting, I think there are blogs online that you can read that help you sort of, walk through, a bit of the, key things that you should be looking for to judge a company, right? And so you want to try to weave as much of that information into your application as possible, so that it shows, similar to what Monique was saying about signaling, the efforts that you're putting in, right? Like going that extra step and saying, hey, like I actually did the assignment, in the way that it was asked, I think goes a long way in an application, and it makes people, really spend time on your application. We'll have people submit things where it's like, why do you think this company is interesting? And then write 2 lines about the company, right? Like that's not quite putting your best foot forward for an application. And you have to remember that, for Black VC, all of our programs are free. Latinx VC, same, all of their programs are free. HBCU VC, all of their programs are free. And so you have hundreds and hundreds of applicants who are, applying for the same, limited number of seats in every cohort. And so you want to just try to put your best foot forward in each of them. And if you're really unsure what that is, then I might go the route of like, hey, knocking on a few doors and trying to get people to, give you an insight into what good looks like. But I think at this point, there's a pretty decent amount of information online that can help you get a good sense of like what directionally good might look like. And I would try to do as much of that as you can in an application. I think it'll go a long way.
Yeah, and just to add, think one interesting perspective is to think of education programs as a business, right? So they want to have really talented, high-performing folks attend the program and then go forth and be very successful, right? Because that's going to increase the brand of their program. So they're going to look for folks that have interesting backgrounds, that are hustlers, that to Monique's point, who is involved in 1,000 different things. You got to do the reps, which I love that metaphor. Like, you have to prove that you are in this to win it, and then hopefully become one of the success stories of the program. So they're investing time and effort and money into you just as much as you're investing time and money into the program. So if you're a success story, then you could be kind of the face of the program going forward. That's like a super win-win situation for everyone. Cool. All righty. So another kind of quick question before I really open it up to the Q&A is folks who have decided, so they've done the work, they've really decided to focus on VC and they're dropping everything else. They want to do VC full-time. Do any of you have any insight in how to like make a living wage from Fund 1 while they're raising Fund 1? Kind of another question related to finances, as it seems like we have a lot of hustlers out there in the audience. Anything that you can share there? Can you do it full-time? Can you do it kind of? Yeah. It's gonna suck. It's
gonna suck. Yeah. That's the answer. It sucks.
Yeah, there's yeah, your fees just are your fund's going to be too small that your fees are going to cover things that they need to cover. But yeah, you need to like save up before you do this. There are some people that have a related business that I've seen, or like somebody is, they're working for somebody else evaluating, company's technology or something, which is a skill that you might want to have. And so they're doing something that's related. If you're going to do that, try to find something that helps you find deals. Yeah, it's just, it's going to be hard until you get to Fund 2 or 3. There's no way around it, really.
I mean, as you get into, I'm trying to give you something more useful than it sucks. As you get into more institutional LPs and you're able to close more institutional LPs, a lot of those LPs do understand that you need to be able to have a living wage and be able to, effectively deploy their capital at the same time. And so then I think it starts to become easier because, they are hopefully, the expectation is that they are writing checks big enough such that you will have more management fees. And so I think it becomes really difficult when, often Fund One is really built on individual investors and maybe some family offices. And I think that it's really difficult to get to a fund of any significant size in that way. And when you don't have a fund of a significant size, you can't really count on management fees to sustain you. Which is, my fund, I've been very lucky, and it was institutional from the first close. And I knew that it needed to be because I needed to make a living doing this. And so I intentionally spent the time to cultivate those relationships with more institutional types of LPs. And I've, very few individuals in my fund because I knew that I needed to make a living doing this, and I couldn't just, have a $5 million or $7 million fund. I needed something more substantial.
Awesome.
There are, small tricks you could do, like moving up your management fees in the earlier years and the like. And especially on the first fund, people are fine with that. They're probably fine with it for a few of them. You get to fund two, you still have a little bit of management fees for your first fund, and then they stack on top of your management fees for the second fund. So then it becomes much easier to actually have a life and run the fund. Also, congratulations to Manit for being able to get institutional LPs in Fund One. That's very difficult to do. So yes, but I wouldn't go out there with that expectation, especially right now while everyone's doing, rebalancing of allocations. And even family offices are doing rebalances of allocations. Your high net worth individuals are going to be your bread and butter for your first fund for at least this year, maybe next year also.
Awesome. Well, great. Now in the final couple minutes, since I don't know how time flies so quickly, any final pieces of advice for our attendees, like programs or what to do next, how to take kind of all the information from this panel and to go forth and successfully break into VC in 5 words or less? No, just kidding. You can do more than 5 words. Let's start with Jean-Claude.
Yeah, I really think it sounds like empty words, but I really think it comes down to just, hustling. I think every person that I've spoken to, or the folks who have mentored me in some way in breaking into venture, it's been some combination of, there is no one path, right? I think everyone assumes that there's one way to break into the industry, but I think it's really just, it's a process of self-reflection, introspection, and just figuring out, to Monique's point, like, what is your superpower and how can you leverage that in a way that convinces others? If you're trying to run a fund, how do you convince LPs to, take a bet on you? And similarly, if you're going to work at a fund, how do I convince a manager to take a bet on me? And I think it's leaning into your strengths. I think trying to go and reinvent yourself for this industry will be exhausting, and I think it'll be difficult. And so, the turning point for me was just leaning into, hey, this is exactly what I like. These are the types of people that I like to spend my time with. And these are the types of companies that I like to back. And it's the types of people that I like to be around. And so can I find a fund where I can do that, right? And I was lucky to do so. And I think I tried the other way of trying to make myself fit for every role that was available. And I think that becomes exhausting very, very quickly. And it's also very demoralizing because venture investors say no every day, hundreds of times a week. And so I think often, are not the most considerate around how they say no. And so it can cut deep every time someone is telling you that you're not the right fit. And I know that goes for founders. I think it's the same for people looking to break in. And so the earlier that you decide to sort of lean into your strengths and your skill set, I think the faster it starts to click a bit more. And then on the hustle side, there's resources out there. Apply to programs, keep applying. I'm a big proponent of like, try everything all at once, all the time, right? Until something cracks, because something will crack. Yeah, but it's not easy. It's not easy. And I don't say these things lightly. Yeah.
Something will crack. Stephen, and then Monique to close out.
I was just to get some questions. I just wanted to reiterate, 'cause somebody was asking what those books were, which was How to Raise a Venture Capital Fund by Winter Mead and Venture Deals by Brad Feld. If you are already at the point where you want to create a venture fund, then go to govclab.com. There's also somewhere on that site the ability to sign up to try to be a venture partner at one of the emerging firms, where your chances are a little higher than being a venture partner at a really large, well-known firm. So it's another avenue, but you really do need to already like get into the dirt there and find companies and be at that referral stage. There's nothing better than just doing the work.
And Monique.
So despite all of the yes, some of the programs are expensive. Yes, GP commits are really difficult to pay. Yes, LPs are difficult to close. Like, despite all of these things that we talked about today, I think there's never been a time in venture that was this open to new people and new pathways into venture capital. Does it need to be more open? Absolutely. Like, there's still a long way to go, but there has never been a time in which it has been a better time to be trying to break your way into venture. And so I think, I would not want any of our, real talk here today to dishearten you around starting a career in venture, because there are pathways to get there. And I think, to John Claude's point, you just have to continue applying to these programs. If you get rejected one time, apply to the next cohort. Like, it's not just like a one and done sort of thing. You have to really continue at it and really keep at it, and be diligent about wanting to get into a program or wanting to get this education at the same time, while you're also, building your investor muscle in whatever way you can, whether that's becoming a venture partner, putting your own money to work, or some other method. But there are ways to do this.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to close out. Hopefully you can see my screen and the investor education programs I have listed up here. Can someone give me a thumbs up? Cool. All right. Since I think I shared the wrong screen last time. So yeah, these are some education opportunities. I just wanted to list for everyone. Things to keep in mind is like the content, networking opportunities. I am still involved with Venture Capital Unlocked at 500 via 500 Startups, 500 Globals alumni groups. And those folks send each other deals left and right. And it's a really strong network that you create via these programs. So take into mind the networking opportunities, the brand strength, if you want that Stanford seal. If it's a lesser known program, keep those things in mind. Generally, the Stanford one is the expensive one, for example. Cost, scholarship opportunities, in person versus virtual, program methodology, and mentorship. So we're out of time, but I wanted to end with a save the date for our StartOut Equity Summit. So this is a huge StartOut annual event. It's super exciting. We have a ton of really fantastic speakers lined up, and you could register at startout.org, check out more information about the event, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you all so much to the beautiful panel that we have, John Claude, Monique, Stephen, y'all have done a really good job, I think, demystifying the VC education space and even raising Fund One in some regards. So my hats off to each of you and best of luck to all of your future endeavors. All right, and we'll go ahead and end.
Thank you.